was extremely excited to visit with today's guest. Lately, I've been watching just about everything out there about him on YouTube and listening to various podcasts. In fact, I'm a bit worried I'm becoming a little bit of a groupie. Since beginning my parapsychology classes at Atlantic University and Rhine Research Center, I feel like my whole world has opened up beyond what I even imagined possible. Learning how to study the whys and hows of the work I do has been fascinating and mind-stretching to say the least. And it absolutely doesn't hurt that my professor has been super fantastic to learn from. I wasn't sure if it would be appropriate to invite my professor onto the show, but I went out on the limb and asked anyway, to which he said he'd be happy to. I've been eagerly awaiting the interview date, and I'm so excited that we finally made it. I am very happy to welcome my professor, parapsychologist Loyd Auerbach. World-recognized paranormal expert and parapsychologist Loyd Auerbach holds a master's degree in parapsychology. He has 43 years of investigating the paranormal and over 40 years teaching courses on the subject. He is director of the Office of Paranormal Investigations, president of the Forever Family Foundation, an adjunct professor at Atlantic University, and is on the board of directors of the Rhine Research Center, where he teaches online parapsychology courses through their education center. He's the co-author of 9 books on the paranormal for the general public, including Psychic Dreaming, ESP Wars East and West, and ESP Hauntings and Poltergeists, a parapsychologist's handbook. He is also co-author of a paranormal mystery series with 2 novels out so far. Near Death was the first, and the second, Afterlife, released last month on January 13th. Since the early 90s, he's been a professional mentalist, performing as Professor Paranormal, having jumped into magic in the 1980s as an outgrowth of his graduate studies, and leading him to serve as president of the Psychic Entertainers Association from 2001 to 2005. He also holds a certificate as a professional chocolatier and conducts guided chocolate tasting sessions. His media appearances number in the thousands, with numerous national TV appearances. Currently, you can see him in episodes of The Unexplained or Surviving Death on Netflix. Without any further delay, please welcome to All Is Not Lost, Professor Loyd Auerbach.
Spirit. Does it stay? Does it go?
The fact is, spirit does survive death. Our loved ones are all around us. Love survives. Spirit survives. All is not lost.
Welcome to the All Is Not Lost podcast. Here's your host, psychic and evidential medium, Rianne Maldonado.
Oh my gosh. So hi again. So much. Thank you for being here, Professor Loyd Auerbach.
Thank you.
I'm so happy to have you here. So I made some notes, and I'm kind of neurotic probably from all my emails that I send you because I was just so excited to have you be on here. But I'm pretty sure I've become a Loyd groupie. I have watched pretty much every single YouTube video you have out there, and I've listened to almost every podcast that you've been on that I can find. And I'm not bored. It's super exciting for me. So thank you for having all that information out there for free for people.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, I had a lot coming to me when I was a student, so I feel like just turning it around. So yeah, it's fine. Happy to do it.
Great. And it's funny for me because, I've always thought I hated science. I really, my whole life, I'm like, I hate science. But what's funny is my degree from 100 million years ago has an emphasis in science because I thought I wanted to be a nurse. So I ended up in a bunch of science classes, but I totally left that behind. But I'm telling you, you have completely changed my world. I'm a completely different person now.
I'm glad. Yeah. Science can be cool, so.
Yes. Well, as you know, I told you that my family, we did a spoon bending party. So that is super cool. We're still talking about that every day. We can't believe that we did that. But for having you here today, I don't know. I kind of want to just let you talk about all the cool stuff because I'm so fascinated. but I know we also talked, if there's time, about some of my weird experiences in life. So where would you like to start?
That's a good that's a good question. Boy, nobody asked me that question.
Oh, well, I hope that's a good question.
Well, I can start just by saying that here's a fact. Okay, people have psychic experiences. People, whatever you think they happen to be. So whatever the skeptics think they are, or other people, it doesn't matter, because people have these experiences in different cultural contexts that are labeled or fall under psychic experiences. And there's so many people that have them. First of all, they're not paranormal. They're normal. It's part of the normal human experience. There are plenty of experiences that are considered normal that very few people ever have. So that's the same case with psychic experiences. The average person may not have many evocative experiences, but they probably have a lot of little ones that they never really think about. So it's a normal thing to have a little ESP, to have some psychokinetic things happen around you. It may not be normal to see an apparition or experience that, because there's not like thousands of them around. So just like I'm not going to run into, a celebrity on the streets of Martinez where I live.
A celebrity.
Probably ever. But if I go to LA, that's a whole different story. It varies depending on where you are and what you're experiencing. So that's number one, is that this stuff is not paranormal. And the experiences need to be studied and explained. I think one of the biggest disservices that the skeptics organizations have done, which is to convince, or I should say, cajole academia in the US to be embarrassed to talk about these experiences and these things, to make studying them, or even raising your interest, talking about your interest in them, to be possibly career ending in some universities. Could lose your job because of that. I know one person who actually did lose his job teaching psychology as an adjunct at a university in Florida because of his interest in the paranormal and parapsychology. Nothing to do with his teaching. He never even mentioned it in his teaching. It's completely outside. So
that's crazy.
It's a total disservice when people have these experiences. They just explain them away. Oh, you're gullible. Oh, you're having a hallucination. Oh, you're crazy. That's ridiculous. It's incredibly non-scientific. And it's against everything that science stands for, actually. So maybe they're not what we think they are, but to ignore them is totally unscientific.
Yeah, that's a great thing to point out, about every single person has something like this happen. And
Right.
When I was young, I used to think I was crazy or weird. I think I watched something with you that said you used to use mind over matter with bowling. Well, when I was a kid, my mom and dad were on bowling leagues. I think I grew up in a bowling alley. And I remember my mom one day, she was really focused on her ball. And I'm like, Mom, what are you doing? And she's like, well, I am wishing that I get a strike. You never wish that anybody else does poorly, but you just wish that I get a strike. And I was like, wow, that's cool. And she got a strike. And then she goes, but if you tell anybody about your magic powers, they'll go away. So that's what I grew up with, thinking, I can't talk about this. This is so cool. I don't know what it is, but I can't talk about it. But, you have opened my mind about this in a really good way, mostly, but a little bit. Last night, I was talking to my husband. He's like, I was worried this would sow seeds of doubt in your abilities. Because when I'm reading about, like last night, part of our homework, phony psychics. And I'm going down the list. Do I do that? Do I do that with my clients? No, okay. I don't do that. So you've got me like really thinking so much about what I do and why and how. And I love it. But,
well, that's good. That's good. But, let me say one thing about this. If you are doing an actual psychic reading or a mediumship reading, okay, and somebody's sitting in front of you and they nod their head in acknowledgement, right? The skeptics would say, oh, you're getting feedback. Yes, you are getting feedback. And in fact, how do you ignore that feedback without blindfolding yourself, turning your back to them? We have, as human beings, we have senses. normal senses, which pick up things sometimes that are not consciously, identified. We also do nonverbal communication with people. So anyone doing a reading is going to pick up stuff, not necessarily consciously, which is, if you do it consciously and you use it consciously, that's fraud, potentially. But it's going to be part of the perceptual process. The question is, are you also getting information that is not from that? And that's where we get into the psychic.
Yes. And that's where now I'm like questioning, but not in a bad way. I'm just really questioning where my information is coming from and what I'm providing to people. And there's no doubt that I do pick up information. And we talked about this one day, that I really like doing phone readings because it eliminates me seeing my client. And I feel like I can trust my responses even more. But sometimes that's not possible. But when I was going through my thought process last night, and even today, my son reminded me, I was getting online one night to do a reading for a total stranger. I only knew her first name. And all of a sudden, the name Peanut pops into my head. I'm like, who the hell is Peanut? What's this Peanut thing? But then I thought of a friend that I had met at the Edgar Cayce Institute. And I texted her and I said, I'm about to go into a reading, so I don't have time to check my phone. But I just thought of the name Peanut. And then I thought of you. And I put my phone down. And then I did the reading for this total stranger. And in the end, I'm like, okay, this is going to sound completely crazy, but would the name Peanut mean anything to you? And she burst into tears and she's like, oh my God, that was my high school best friend who died. After the reading, I get a message back from the friend in Virginia Beach. And she was saying her best friend's dad just died. His nickname was Peanut. Now, I could not have gotten that from seeing anybody. That came from somewhere else. I don't know where. We've talked about that in class. Did I go into the future and find that? Did I telepathically pick it up from two people? Like, who knows? But those little bits of information like that kind of brought me reassurance that I'm not just reading people.
Right. And that's the reality, is that some things come through so clearly and they're absolutely not from any sort of information feedback. I've seen readings by a few of the mediums under relatively controlled, not perfect control conditions, but watching these medium, this happened with John Edward. I was watching a reading that he did as part of Gary Schwartz's series of experiments. And he did have his back to the woman, so she was close by. But the fact is that he started going down a path. It's not like, did you have a dog, a white dog? He just said, you had a white dog, you had X, and he just continued on that. With no feedback at all. I mean, it might have been some unconsciously hearing her shifting around, but it's not like he was fishing for information. And every bit of that was specific and on point. So any reading anybody does when you're getting any kind of feedback is going to be included. But any conversation you have with someone is going to be you're going to be picking up feedback, nonverbals and things, and that's included. So, it's just that when they claim, oh, it's all cold reading, or you're doing, generalizations, and you're doing, it doesn't work on so many levels.
Well, that brings me comfort because I know that I'm not purposely doing any of that. And I know that I get this crazy information that I can't match up. I had a reading recently, and I won't spend the time talking about this, but the first thing I see is this Palomino horse, and he's like staring at me, and he's like totally trying to tell me something. And I'm like, you had a Palomino horse and it was during your childhood and blah, 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 whatever else I said. And she's like, oh my God, I don't know. Why would a horse, weird things.
I mean,
I don't know.
Why would you even make that's not a generalization. I mean, it would fit a very small percentage of people, unless they were wearing like a pin that had a horse on it and came wearing riding clothes. You wouldn't even know they had anything to do with horses, right?
No, she was so well dressed. You could tell she had money. Yeah. She had diamond rings, like the horse just staring at me. So, anyway, it was just super interesting. So when I'm reading both sides, I'm really just learning to expand my mind and look at it through a different angle. Yep. And that's totally new to me. Totally new.
Well, and one important thing, I think that there have been a number of psychics who have written books that include talking about psychic fraud and determining what a psychic is and what a fraud is. Eileen Garrett, who's an incredibly well-known medium back during the early 20th century, first half of the 20th century, well-researched, never criticized or attacked by skeptics, which is really interesting in itself. And she wrote a book called The Sense and Nonsense of Prophecy, which is significantly about psychic fraud and how you determine the difference and all of that. So psychics are aware of that, and some of them have made sure that other people are aware that they're aware, but that's not how they operate. So, yeah.
Fascinating. Well, I know that I also wanted to talk to you about this. I mentioned it in my email. So I went to England last year 3 times to study under a medium, a spiritualist medium there in England. And it was amazing, just a completely crazy experience. But on my last trip there, the rest of the students, and I think there was only like 8 or 9 of us, wanted her to demonstrate table tipping. And I was the biggest skeptic on the planet. I'm like, this is so not going to work. I don't believe it. She showed me a video of her at Arthur Findlay College moving this ginormous heavy oak wooden table. I still didn't believe it because it wasn't there. There we are in this conference room at this hotel. I brought the table with her from her home, just a little cute table. So I knew there was nothing on it. And we get the music going, kind of like with the spoon bending. So now my perception's totally changed. We get the music going, we get the energy up. And I even double checked. It was fingertips, no thumbs, just fingertips around the table. That table walked across the whole room to every single person in a circle, like dancing on its legs. I had never seen anything like this. My mind was blown. Half of me was still like, what the heck am I seeing? But the other part was like, but you're seeing it. So I left England a believer. But now that I'm in this class, I'm like, was it just all of our collective PK? Like, did we all just get together and psychokinetically move this table? Was there no spirit?
Well, and how much of that was the ideomotor response? Because you can teach people to do table tipping without any psychic anything whatsoever. So that's another element here. It doesn't mean that, this is the thing about the ideomotor response are minor impulses, unconscious impulses, muscular impulses. Probably the most common way you can demonstrate that is with a pendulum. Just holding something at the end of a string with 2 fingers and then willing it, just thinking, go into a circle. And for most people, it will. And you're not moving your hand.
Right.
But actually it is you doing it. That does not mean that you're not getting psychic input in some circumstances. It does not mean that. It just means that the force that's actually causing that is actually you. But some respects, that's still psychokinesis. It's still mind over matter. In this case, it's your unconscious creating these minor muscle impulses to get an end result or move a table.
Crazy. So at this point, I don't know what to think of that experience. You know what I mean? I guess from a parapsychologist's opinion, well, and I guess I didn't tell the listeners that you are a parapsychologist. You teach all over the place. And we probably should have you define some of these terms we're using. But from your perspective, would you just say that that's still an unknown, that whole table tipping, because it could be ideomotor, it could be psychokinesis, it could be spirit? Or what do you say?
Well, we know that the ideomotor response is typically included, even if there's something more going. The question a lot of times about psychokinesis and things like that, actually, let's extend that out. Yes. Story we hear about the woman being thrown, the mother being thrown out of a heavy car, the car rolls over, the kid is trapped. She pulls open the door or rips it off the hinges, breaks the seatbelt and pulls the kid out before anything happens to the car. All right. We've heard those stories over and over again over the years. It used to be you'd say, oh, it was adrenaline. Well, first of all, adrenaline cannot make your bones not break and your ligaments not tear. That's number one. I have wondered about that story for a long time. I did talk to an author who had talked to people and had actually read records of that kind of thing. But I actually met a couple of doctors back in 95, one an emergency room physician and the other was a surgeon, and actually orthopedic surgeon. And they had, as I'm talking to them about mind over matter stuff, because I was writing my book, this was at a party. And, they're looking pretty skeptical. And I said, hey, I just out of curiosity, you guys ever read in any medical journal or medical newsletter anything about a situation like this with the car. And they looked at each other and they looked back at me and said, well, we had a case like that last month.
Wow.
And it was a woman, like, I think they said she was 110 pounds, thrown out of her car flipped over. People saw this happen. She did not rip the door off its hinges, but she pulled open the door and apparently it was crumpled. She then broke the seatbelt and pulled her son out. Not that he was really in any danger, but he was upside down. So they examined her because she was thrown out of the car. And the examination, when I said, well, what about what was her injury or anything like it? She had some bruises and scratches from being thrown out of the car. I said, okay, fine. Orthopedic surgeon, what should have happened, given the fact that she not only pulled the door open, but she lifted the car up to do that because it was being blocked at the bottom. And he and the other doctor looked at each other and there was this like aha moment. And the guy said, probably some broken bones, if nothing but at least torn ligaments and tendons. And I said, and? Yeah, she was perfectly okay, except for the bruises and the scratches. And they said there's no way she could have avoided those other injuries, no matter what. So what does that mean? Does that mean that her mind made her body kind of shored up her body to make sure she wouldn't have that kind of internal damage? Or did she actually levitate the car enough to pull it open, but she had to have her hand on it because let's face it, if that car had levitated and people saw that, anybody, even the person doing it, would have freaked out completely.
Yes.
So my colleague, Martin Caden from years ago, who could do PK, a science and science fiction writer, he believed that there was some levitation or movement going on by the mind in cases like that. But because of our psychology, we had to keep contact to make it look like it's the $6 million man.
Is that the witness inhibition or what's the other one?
That's
ownership responsibility.
It's ownership resistance.
Ownership
resistance. But there were also, just imagine that you're coming down to help and you see the car levitate.
Right.
What would your reaction have been, besides probably running in fear or freaking out or freezing at that moment?
Okay,
so
yes, me, I would have loved it.
Yeah, me too. There's a cultural thing, so it's hard to know what's going on because we can't duplicate those situations. We could, with table tilting, it'd be interesting to have real experiments where we actually can tell how much pressure is put on the top of the table and the bottom of the table and all of that. That could be done with sensors pretty easily. Although I'd almost want to disguise them underneath like a tablecloth because I wouldn't want the people to think about the sensors.
Very good point. Yes, that would make sense.
So that would be really interesting to do. And, then you can get an idea of what's actually happening with the balance of the table and all of that. Yeah.
Wow. Well, it was funny when I came home from that trip. I was so there's no words. But my parents were so cute. They live in California like you, and they went to an antique store and they bought me a little antique wooden table to practice on. And I remember my teacher saying, you just sit with your table every day and you meditate and you ask spirit to, remember, I'm being trained by mediums,
right?
Not scientists. So I'm coming from almost 8 years of just pure mediumship and psychic training now to the science side. And I'm really trying to reconcile that. But I have my little table over here and it's cute to look at.
That's good. That's good. Well, I don't know if it's on YouTube, but the amazing Kreskin, who's a mentalist, a very well-known mentalist who was on TV for many, many years, did a sequence on one of his shows. And I think it might be on YouTube or some segment about that, where he had a group of people coming up from the audience and he did some basic discussion induction and he had them all, table tilting and moving the tables all over the place. Definitely not spirit related, unless there are spirits kind of who are fans of Kreskin, I guess.
This is so crazy. Like, I'm losing my train of thought because now I'm just thinking these things. Everything I've known up until now is totally different now. It's like I'm
you have
unlearning.
To look at things differently. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's unfortunate too is that some really good psychics and mediums are themselves not educated in some basic principles of science. And so they label them paranormal or supernatural or psychic. I've worked with a couple of folks who didn't know the difference between, if they saw any figure, it was a spirit. even if that figure was of somebody who's still alive. No, that's a real spirit. It's like, yeah, no, that's an imprint. That's something else. You're picking up something psychically. And one of my students in my other Rhine class last night mentioned that there's a medium she's taking classes from. She's a little concerned about, because the medium stated that if you hear, somebody asked if I have, who's in the mediumship class, apparently asked about ringing in the ear. And the medium said that, this is the medium said that spirit's communicating with you.
That's what we're taught.
Yep. Yeah, that's called tinnitus if you have it constantly. And it's otherwise air pressure related. I've had that happen to me time and again. And some UFO people, unfortunately, say that's aliens communicating with you because you've been abducted.
Oh my God. No, I have tinnitus. And so every time I have a mediumship teacher talking about that, I'm like, oh, and I just sit quietly.
Well, maybe you should pull the medium teacher aside and say, look, that's not the case. There's a medical reason for this.
Right.
Yeah.
This is not just
because what happens is then you have to question other things the medium teaches you too.
Yeah. There's a lot of that out there. And you know, Loyd, that's kind of, I think I was brought to your classes by spirit. I don't know. That's what I would normally say. Now I don't know what to say, but I was brought here for a reason, because I have this trouble that I walk the line between, and I'm going to offend somebody here. I know it. I don't want to be lumped in with kind of the woo-woo people who do what I do, but I wasn't educated in the science side of it. And now I feel like I found my home because I don't fit in with that crowd. I walk around like a normal person. I don't think every single thing that happens is spirit, like ringing in my ears. But I didn't have another group to put myself in. And now I feel better having this more scientific side. The parapsychological side makes way more sense in my brain. We do cool stuff, but it doesn't always have to be what we think it is. Right.
And, you know, the mediums who have pretty much all the mediums for the Forever Family Foundation, which I'm president of and very happy to be connected to, they have expressed so much interest in the science side. You know, when I and some of my colleagues have spoken at either conferences or for the grief retreats, they're there. I mean, they're right there, and they read stuff about the research. They want to know that. It's because they're trying to figure out, you know, they want to know what they're actually doing and what the limits are. Are there limits? You know, how do we figure out what's actually happening? And I think that's really important. The woo-woo side of things, the new age side, there's a lot of that out there. But, you know, I know that some of the people, because I've talked to some people who teach that stuff who don't believe it. It's because the students that come to them want that. They're giving people what they want. And that's unfortunate, because now they're sending people out in the world who are going to make some statement to somebody who's going to go, I have tinnitus. You're an idiot.
Right. I know. And that's why I've been so hungry for something I didn't even know existed.
Yeah.
And why I'm so happy now, and the Forever Family Foundation, I did reach out to them. I am looking at the path of certifying with them.
Good.
I really, really want to. I'm just scared, but I appreciate that you did tell me that you knew somebody that tried 3 times before they.
Oh yeah. It's actually not uncommon for people to miss the first time. So.
That makes me feel better, because you know, now I know mind over matter. My mind is going to get in the way and prevent me from doing a good job. I just know it. But anyway, so this is so fun actually having you kind of dissect experiences. So I did mention in my email, I have lived in 2 houses that I believe something was going on. I used to say haunted. Now I'm not sure. I'm going to let you label them. In one instance, in Temecula, California, I lived in a house with a pretty terrible ex-husband. And I was 100% certain that my grandfather's spirit was there. I don't know why. I just knew. I just felt it. And then there were things that would happen, which, again, I know you're going to rip them apart, and I'm okay with that. He was an electrician. And strangely enough, always the lights. I would turn off all the kitchen lights and be walking upstairs to go to bed. All the lights would come on. bright as day. My dad didn't believe me till he came over and it happened. And then the funniest one was my parents were over watching a movie with us one night. And in the old days, like I'm that old, but in the old days, you would hook your TV through your stereo so you could listen in stereo speakers.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we had the stereo that also had the CD player, the radio, and the stereo setting. So it was set on stereo because we're watching a movie. Well, we walked my parents out to go home and we go upstairs to go to bed. And all of a sudden, the CD part comes on, blasting so loud, AC/DC's Hell's Bells. And my grandfather, when he was mad, would kick things and go, Hell's Bells. And I was like, oh my God, it is my grandpa. And then the minute I divorced that guy and kicked him out of the house, it all stopped. So, that, who knows there. But then before I let you dissect that one, the other one, I did talk about this in class, and there's news articles about the murder-suicide house I lived in Spokane, Washington. And a medium that worked with me through that process, the one that told me I was a medium and I laughed at her, she really thought that it was the house and the area that drove the guy to do what he did. I didn't know that at the time. I just knew that I was terrified every minute of the day. Everything that was happening in the house was weird. But then, when my husband and I started having problems in that house, looking back from what she was saying, I wondered, was it the house? Were we headed down the same path as the guy who murdered his wife and kids? Or were we creating it because we were already unhappy? I don't know. But then what would explain him and his situation? So I don't know. What do you think about these?
Okay. So the first one, if you were sure it was your grandfather, that's your own impression. You could have been creating or co-creating some of that as well. Especially if you're under stress from the horrible ex-husband. Yeah. And he may have actually been showing himself there just to let you know he was there protecting you too. In some cultures, having an ancestor, somebody who is a relative around you is normal. I mean, that's what happens. We have a guardian spirit.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. So that's one piece of it. The other place, what's really interesting is people leave emotions behind. The idea of a haunting, or what they call on TV residual haunting, psychic imprint, place memory, places and objects seem to hold information, and emotion is the majority of the information that seems to come out. So you can walk into a place and feel like if you're house hunting, and just get a feel that the vibe is wrong. It feels awful here. There's something, I don't want to live here. And people just write that off. And then if you were to do a little research, talk to the realtor and actually get an honest response, you'd find out that the house is being sold because the couple is having knockdown, drag-out fights and arguments. They're getting divorced and they're getting rid of the house. So their emotions are imprinted there, and we're picking that up. That's the kind of haunting we normally pick up. So if the house is one with history where there's a lot of abuse going on, a lot of violence, things like that, that's going to affect people unconsciously. And that's possible. So especially the murder-suicide, especially what drove them to the murder-suicide. The house might have not have driven them to that, but the emotion of that may have stayed with the house. All right. So, but what you describe in terms of your own experience is interesting, because we have tied that kind of thing occasionally to the Earth's magnetic field in the location.
That's right.
So I had a house in a town called Danville here in the Bay Area. It's near, we have a couple of smaller mountains, Mount Diablo. The name is because of there's various legends about why the Catholic missionaries called it, the monks called it Mount Diablo. It was sacred to the native tribes, so they tried to keep them away from it as they're converting them to Catholicism. But there's a lot of geological activity under the mountain, in fact. And there's kind of little fault lines that come off the mountain. We got a call. This is back when we had a parapsychology program at JFK in the 80s. And got a call from a couple that was having terrible nightmares and awful feelings, specifically in the living room and dining room, just like that's where things were actually centered, but it was kind of radiating throughout the whole house. And they wanted to know if the place was haunted. They probably weren't going to live there much longer. They're having lots of fights. So we went down and we were able to measure. There was something odd about the geology. So we were able to get some measurement of the geomagnetic field right there. And there was like a line of high geomagnetic activity straight through the house, right through the living room, through the bedroom and such. About a year later, I got a call from a couple. The symptoms are exactly the same. They say that they're living in Danville, and I'm thinking, well, there's other fault lines there in Danville. But I looked up the address in my files. It was the same house.
Wow.
So they sold the house and moved out. And then about a year or so later, I hear from another couple. And as soon as they start describing what's going on, I said, I kept the addresses in my head. And I said, was it this house? And they said, yes. So that was purely environmental, not psychic. Human beings are sensitive to certain things. So the explanation of this is that there's this, think of this as in the background, and we're not hearing it, but we're feeling it. Somebody is scraping their nails on a blackboard. Yeah, okay. That's the reaction. Most people have that reaction. So if that's going on in the background, you're always going to be on edge. And so the littlest things are going to cause you to have nightmares and to have arguments and all of that. Unfortunately, there's not a lot we can do. It's a physical environment thing. There's another area not too far from where I live. Years ago, went with my late colleague, Annette Martin. We investigated this case because when they moved in, they had all sorts of physical stuff happening, knockdown, drag-out fights between the husband and wife, not too physical, but enough to get divorced. They were separated. Her son suddenly became psychic. I mean, he just started developing this mediumistic abilities. They saw kind of started figures around there. The woman was really very on top of things, and she had talked to neighbors to see if anybody else had a haunted house. Well, here's an interesting thing. On this one street, 50% divorce rate.
Wow.
Which is crazy. 3 suicides.
Oh my God.
And we were able to measure a high we walked in, Annette said, oh, there's a lot of energy here in the background. And we were able to actually, again, get a measurement in the area and huge geomagnetic field right there. So,
I would be so curious to measure that on that house because
that's
weird.
There are things in the physical environment that are invisible to us that we don't normally consider. But in the last 40 years, there's been significant research looking at geomagnetic fields and their effect on human brains and everything else. So there are effects on us, and the environment does affect us. And so if there's this thing going on in the earth that's a problem, it can trigger psychic experiences. It can trigger all sorts of things. There's a well-known house down in Southern California. It's on Cielo Drive near the house, which house I'm talking about, the Omen House.
I'm familiar with the area, yeah.
Near Charles Manson, the whole Manson thing happened. And he plays it up. I mean, David Omen's been playing it up. Fact is that there is physical stuff going on. It's not a fraud. There's a lot of physical stuff going on. There's a lot of but Barry Taff and another colleague of mine measured an incredibly high geomagnetic field. In fact, Barry Taff is so sensitive to those kinds of high fields that he got sick every time we went to the house. He wouldn't go anywhere near the place at all. And there was somebody else that also got ill being in the place too. That's how bad it was. So
this is going to drive me nuts. I'm going to want to know the measurements there because, Loyd, didn't you also teach us that the environment, maybe it was EMF, correct me if I'm wrong, they can even make you hallucinate or think you... Yeah,
geomagnetic fields can, depending on how they're hitting your brain, can cause you to hallucinate too. They also may, the thing is that there are correlations also in shifting geomagnetic fields, which is normal. I mean, where we are locally, there are going to be shifts in geomagnetic field just generally because of deep earth activity, because of weather, sunspots, solar. There's a number of things that affect the geomagnetic field. It's not a consistent thing, though. And shifting fields can actually make us more or less psychic in certain ways, even just temporarily.
Well, that's what's interesting because I try to be more careful with my words now, but I say I don't believe in possession. Like it just doesn't.
Yeah, I don't either. I don't.
And I know that pisses people off, but I just don't feel it. But what I will say is in that house, I had an experience that I had no other word for, except it felt like somebody was trying to steal my soul out of my body. And I said, if this is what possession feels like, I don't know, but that was the only word I could use to describe it. And now I'm wondering, if there was a high geomagnetic field, maybe in that moment whatever was happening, I'm hoping maybe it was environmental, because it was horrifying. It was so horrifying. I left my newborn baby downstairs and went screaming up the stairs to get my husband.
Wow.
No mother leaves their baby behind, but I was that terrified about what was happening to me. And I've never had a good explanation for it, except demons and evil.
It could have been geomagnetic. Let's remember, though, that if a medium or someone else goes into trance and allows someone to come in, that's also possession, technically.
I've always wondered that. Why can they channel, but it's not possession? I've always wondered that.
From an anthropological perspective, in anthropology, because we're cultures all over the world where people let spirits and gods come in, they channel, that's all possession. But as actually several mediums have told me when I've asked them over the years, what if somebody, because sometimes you're doing a reading, I've seen mediums do a reading, and then they go into an altered state, and all of a sudden they have somebody pop in. They have a drop-in communicator. Yeah. And I've asked, well, how do you get rid of them if they're not willing to leave? And every one of them said, I tell them to leave. I'm the one who's alive. They're dead.
Yes. Have some ownership of yourself,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah, right. Otherwise,
I understood that.
I don't understand. I mean, if you think you're a victim and are, then you're going to be a victim. That's pretty much what I've been told.
Oh, it's hard. Like I said, this life I lead where I'm hanging out with these people who believe that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I never correct people. I just kind of do my thing, but it doesn't be true to me.
One of my students from another school I was teaching at for a long time, who's a medium, she's really developed into a very good medium, worked as a hotel concierge. So she's really good with people in general. But she's gone to Arthur Findlay, and she's been studying all over the place. And she occasionally is part of mediumship circles here in the Bay Area. And she's told me that some of the mediums she talks to, because she does a lot of investigations on her own, she'll go to places and do investigations on her own. And they are shocked that she does that, because they're terrified. She said, some of them are terrified of ghosts, not the ones who are on the other side, but the ones who are still here. They're terrified. And when I've said that to some of the other mediums that I work with, the Forever Friend, they're like, what?
It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't compute. Yeah.
No, I always say, and I think you said this in a lecture, I'm more afraid of living people than dead people.
Yeah.
I don't think that they can hurt me.
Yeah. Yeah, I get asked by ghost hunters what I do to protect myself before I go in a house. It's like, well, I do use deodorant, but otherwise, I'm just worried about the living people. I really don't worry about spirits or anything paranormal at all. I've never had to do it. I don't know any of my colleagues who do.
No, I don't, and I'm looked down upon, I'm sure, by other mediums that I don't either. I don't feel that I need to put a protective bubble around myself. I don't feel like I'm taking anybody's energy home with me. I just know I get on and I work, and then I say goodbye and I'm done working, and I go back to my family, and I usually eat a good meal because I've been up here for so long. I need to eat something grounding, but I don't really carry crystals in my bra and do all that stuff either. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to lose a lot of listeners after this one. They're going to see my true colors. I'm just changing. I'm growing.
What's important to do is you got to use a little common sense about all of this stuff. And there's an awful lot of folklore out there. I mean, look at all the ghost hunters who are investigating in the dark because TV tells them to do that. Yeah. It's not based on anything but folklore from phony mediums from the early 20th century. That's what it's based on. And TV producers who want to have people use night shot because it looks cool. I talk to, or I find out about ghost hunters who investigate in the middle of the night in the dark when the people have only seen the ghosts at noon.
Yes.
It's like,
well, you mean the veil isn't thinner in the middle of the night, Loyd? Come on. That's what they say, that it's thinner and, you'll get more activity. And I'm like, I like to sleep. I'm not going to investigate it.
It doesn't work that way. Only thing about the middle of the night is that the outside world is quieter. The environment is quieter. That's the only thing that's there. And that's great, except that if that doesn't match the occurrences of the witness testimony, then you better request well in advance that the ghosts show up at 3 a.m. you better
Make
put
it
in
big.
your request. You have to ask, and assume that they're going to take it, and be nice when you ask, because otherwise, they're never going to show up. I always have, these days I'm pointing to the TV show Ghosts on CBS.
Oh, okay.
And
I haven't
look,
seen
I
it.
love that. It's a wonderful show. There's a British version, also called Ghosts on HBO Max from the BBC. And the ghosts actually sleep at night.
Smart ghosts.
Yeah, they're not haunting the house at night. They're only having fun during the day or in the evening. So, yeah.
Oh, that's hilarious. Oh my gosh. You did talk about, I think, a really famous case. I think I've heard you talk about it a few times. You went to a woman's house because she had actual marks on her neck and she was wearing
Yes.
a scarf. But I can't remember what you ended up determining how she was getting the actual marks on her neck.
All right. So this was a woman who claimed, she had called us at the university. She claimed that she was being grabbed by a shadowy figure. So the shadow person, but a really big one, almost bear-like, would grab her, lift her off the ground, throttle her, never really damaged her permanently. And before she came in, we asked her to come into the university to talk to us. She claimed she had an attack that was witnessed by some of her coworkers. Now, she had been a cop in the Bay Area, San Francisco. She got divorced. She moved to Alaska, where she was a cop, came back to the Bay Area because she had left her son with her husband, her ex-husband. He was 16 now, and she really wanted to be back before he grew out of the house, more or less. So she came back, and the attack started not too long after she came back. She was working in high-tech security. She was still carrying a gun because they had government contracts. Most of the people were ex-military cops or ex-cops. And so she came into the university to meet with myself and one of my colleagues, Sharon Solf and Sharon Frankmont now, and with her coworker. And the story she told us was she was at her boss's, they were at their boss's house for a cookout. She went in to use the bathroom. She was coming out of the bathroom, and there's this figure standing there, grabs her, lifts her off the ground, holds her against the wall. But she had screamed, and people came running and saw her levitated off the ground, and then them showing up actually made it disappear. So I immediately turned to the coworker and said, "What'd you see?" And he looked very sheepish about this and said, "Well, we saw her with her feet on the ground. She's sliding down against the wall. No one saw her off the ground, but they did see these marks appearing on her throat. And she had been wearing a scarf, so she took off the scarf and there were bruises. Sharon, first thing she asked was, "Do you have a boyfriend?" Because unfortunately, too often, this has happened in our field where there's abuse happening and this is blamed on something paranormal. All right. Okay. Not the case in this instance. So we decided we set up a time to go visit her where she was living. She had moved only to the Bay Area about 6 months before. She was living with her mother temporarily until she got enough money to get her own apartment, living in a town called Pacifica, south of San Francisco, right on the water, pretty much. The apartment actually faced right out on the beach in Pacifica. It was very nice. Wow. 1 bedroom. Where we walk into the apartments, first thing we notice is a stack of the Weekly World News and the National Enquirer, which at the time was doing an awful lot of psychic stuff. Books on the paranormal and on the occult as well. There had been an experience she had, which was really interesting, of a serious dream, a really strong dream of a neighbor's kid walking into the surf and getting pulled away by riptide and dying. And she actually had tried to tell the neighbor to keep her kid away from the water. But her neighbor yelled at her and said, "How dare you? It happened." Now the neighbor would never talk to her again. They was avoiding her altogether. So that had also happened. So she clearly had some psychic ability. So we're sitting there talking about all of this. And I am in a chair facing the woman who's sitting on a sofa. There's a kitchen to her right, my left. Against the kind of facing away from the back door, the sliding doors to the ocean, Sharon and the mother. And Margie gets up. She walks over to the kitchen, asks if anybody wants a glass of water. We say no. We're having her recount all these experiences. And we're talking to the mother now. Margie grabs a glass, turns on the faucet, starts getting some water, puts down the glass, walks out of the kitchen, looks down the hallway towards the front door like she heard something. I can see straight down the hall. There's nobody there. Walks back to the kitchen. This happens one more time. Now, when this is happening, especially after the second time, I'm like mentally hearing spooky music, tubular bells from The Exorcist and stuff like that. I knew something was going on. So when she turns around, she actually screams, throws her hands up in the air like this, and starts falling to the ground. I got close enough to catch her just before she hit the ground, because I was already out of my chair when this happened. Her hands never touched her throat. Sharon comes running over. The mother comes running over. Margie is choking and barely able to say anything, but says, "Get it off me." We can see 4 finger depressions on one side and one on the other happening after her throat bulges out. Throat bulges out first. So she says, "Get it off me." Sharon gives me this signal, because Sharon was an incredibly good, not only psychologist, she was a good psychic. And she gave me a signal. She wasn't picking up anything. No spirits, nothing. Wow. So I started, basically, I'd only been in California again. I'm from New York originally. I became a New Yorker, and I started using a few cuss words and telling her to get the F off of her. And lo and behold, it stopped. And then, of course, I said, "And you'll never bother her again," very forcefully. So we get her up, and Sharon's indication that there was no spirit. Sharon then starts asking some questions. First thing we should have asked right away is, "Where do you sleep, Margie?" Because it's a 1-bedroom apartment, right? Well, it was made perfect sense. The sofa she was sitting on was a sofa bed. We started asking questions about some other things. You know, her mother at one point after the attack said, "You should probably tell them about the nightmares." Apparently she started having nightmares not long after she moved back down to her mother's place, of her father molesting her as a child, abusing her and molesting her. Father had been dead for years. She was adamant it was not the spirit. That thing was not her father, though. But that happened. She was seeing a psychologist for that, a therapist. Therapist knew nothing about the attacks because she always wore a scarf. We asked. And then Sharon, being a good psychologist, we started talking about the son visiting, and there was a trigger that was pretty clear timing-wise, that the first nightmare happened after the first weekend that the son visited. And Sharon said, "Where does the son sleep? Where did he sleep?" Well, it was a very large sofa bed, and apparently that first weekend that he came down from Walnut Creek, he slept in the same bed as his mother. And that triggered the recollection of that triggered the memories, the buried memories of the father molesting and everything else. The first attack happened after the first couple of visits to the therapist, as if this figure was trying to shut her up to stop blaming her father for what happened.
Wow.
So we figured that she was doing it to herself. And actually, we got permission for Sharon to talk to the therapist, who, once the therapist heard about the attacks, everything kind of came together. Because a lot of adults around their 30s, when they start recovering memory of having been abused, they have intense guilt about having caused it to begin with, because that's what they were told when they were kids. That it's your fault, I'm doing this to you. You know, it's not the adult who's doing it. It's because of you. And so this was punishment for ratting out her dad, basically.
Oh my God.
So when we talk about poltergeist phenomena, we normally think about it going outward, but we have good examples like this one. This is an extreme example of psychosomatic illness or psychosomatic effect, where you have a physical illness because of actual psychological stress. Another example, which is a little different, is if you have someone who's incredibly suggestible and hypnotizable, you hypnotize them, you tell them that a pencil is a red hot iron poker, you touch their skin, and some people actually instantly get a blister.
Wow. Oh my
That's
gosh.
not, I mean, that's mind over matter at its worst, I guess you could say. So when I hear people talking about being attacked by things and bruised, especially when there is probably something else going on. It's probably not a spirit doing that. It's something from inside. It may be a reaction to a spirit, but there's something, a part of them is at least doing it. is doing the physical activity.
That is so fascinating. I have always wondered that because I've never thought spirit was going to reach out and hurt me. You know, so when I hear these, I'm just not sure. But
it's pretty rare we even have.
Powerful.
It's very rare we even have apparitions who can move anything, who can affect the world physically. It seems like they got to learn they literally have to learn how to do it. It's not an instant thing. It almost always takes months for something like that to start happening after there is perception of an apparition there.
Interesting. Oh my gosh. How do you know that afterwards Margie was fine?
Yeah. I mean, it all worked out with the therapist. Once she knew what was going on, she was able to actually help her. And she actually didn't have another attack because, the parapsychologist from New York.
Away.
Yeah. So either that's what it is, what it was, what we thought it was, or I scared the hell out of some other thing that was attacking her. So.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's so crazy. I remember when I was hearing you first talk about that, I'm like, this is insane. It's your mind can't even wrap around it the first time you hear something like that, Oh my gosh.
It was very weird. It was a weird thing to witness, but I had, there's always more to it. I mean, that's the thing. I've had people tell me they got pushed down the stairs by the apparition. It's like, well, how do you know it was the apparition that pushed you down the stairs? How do you know you didn't trip? Well, the apparition was at the bottom of the stairs. If the apparition was at the bottom of the stairs, how did the apparition push you from behind?
With magic. With
right.
PK. They reached around with a really long
It would have been
arm.
PK, but it's still, there have been cases we've had where people claim that they were, hit by something happened with the ghost, and the ghost looked shocked, according to the other witnesses.
Oh my gosh.
Because people are idiots sometimes. I mean, people are clumsy, and you can't blame everything on a ghost.
No, that's for sure. I should probably have you explain or define PK, since we keep talking about it,
right.
And apparition and ghost. Like, I know because you've taught me, but I would love for the listeners to hear it from you.
Sure. So PK is short for psychokinesis. Most people would know the term telekinesis, because they use it in movies and TV, mind over matter. But psychokinesis is broader than the idea that we just move stuff with our minds. That's part of psychokinesis. It means action by the mind at a distance. So action in that way. Healing, like psychic healers use psychokinesis, whether they're doing energy healing or other kinds of healing. Self-healing is psychokinesis. Metal bending is psychokinesis. Effects on computers and other electronics is mind over matter effects, psychokinesis. So there's a range of things. It's any effect of the mind on the outside world or even on yourself that's direct impact on the body by your mind or outside. Apparition is a term that's been used since the beginning days of psychical research. It's a cleaner term than ghost. Fact is that if the word ghost or the translations of that word around the world, sometimes have very different meanings than the idea that when we talk about an apparition of the dead, we're talking about an apparition of someone who is deceased. Now that's what we think of as a ghost, and we can use that interchangeably in this culture, but I wouldn't necessarily in other cultures or for other cultures. There also are apparitions of living people when they're having an out-of-body experience. Sometimes they're seen. And so they're not physically there, but they're still seen as an apparition.
Is that by location or is that something different?
If somebody's seen, it is by location. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah. Apparition of the living, same kind of thing. Exactly.
I heard about a nun who was seen in the nunnery, whatever they're called. But
Convent,
she was also seen in America at the same time. But, people saw her in both places. So, but anyway, yeah. So you can have a living apparition in two places, and that would be called bilocation? Conceivably
called bilocation, right. Yeah.
Okay.
Usually in bilocation, the person is aware that they're doing it. So it may not be intentional, but they're still aware of both places at once. Typically, yeah.
Oh, fascinating. Okay, and I like when you talk about hauntings and place memory. The differences between, you could have an apparition, but usually it's that place that's holding on to those recordings, correct? Impressions.
Right. So we had a case years ago. It was actually for TV. We went to a burned out discotheque here in the Bay Area for a TV segment for Halloween. And I had with me a psychic I was working with, who was also a psychologist. Actually, she mainly works as a psychologist, but started out as a psychic, realized she was doing counseling, and got her PhD. So she was with me, and the TV show had brought with them a young, pretty psychic, somebody, some eye candy psychic. And we went into this burned out place that had a reputation for being haunted, which made no sense because there was nobody in the place. The fire had happened in the late 70s. This is in the early 80s. Why they thought it was haunted, none of us could figure out, other than there was another ghost story nearby. And so we go into the place, and I will say the caretaker, there was a manager caretaker of the disco who lived in an apartment above the building. And we go inside, and this other psychic starts moving her hands around and go, "Oh, I see plenty of spirits, and they're dancing, and there's music." And she goes on and on about all the spirits that are there. My friend Beth Hedva pulls me aside and says, "Yeah, no, she might be picking up on the imprint." And we started talking about this, like, no one died in the fire except the caretaker. And since this was a disco with people in their 20s, I could almost guarantee that 99.9% of them were still alive, if not all of them, right?
Yeah.
So that made no sense unless for some reason there were a lot of ghosts, apparitions that were coming to a burned out disco to dance. Made no sense. So we go outside, and I said, "So what do you think is going on?" She says, "Well, there's an imprint," but she said, "I'm getting an impression also that the caretaker didn't die in the fire." I said, "What do you mean? That's in the newspapers." She said, "No, he died before the fire." And she got an impression that he died because of a drug deal gone wrong. So we're standing outside. This is at night. There's a big spotlight. People in the neighborhood are coming over. A guy starts pushing through a crowd. He turns out to be a sheriff's deputy from Marin County. And he's asking us, because we're the first people he sees, what's going on. And we tell him what's going on. And Beth Hedva says, "So do you know how the caretaker actually died? Did he die in the fire?" Guy says, "No, he died. The autopsy showed he died of blunt force trauma. We're pretty sure it had to do with the fact that he was dealing drugs out of the place."
Wow.
So she hit the nail on the head. But she also didn't pick up a spirit. This was information she picked up. So the difference here is there's an imprint of the gaiety, the dancing, the partying that went on. All of those people are still alive, just like you have a recording of a movie from the 1930s and all those people are dead, but we can still watch the movie. It's a recording. When that movie came out, everybody was alive. I mean, I just went to see Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania yesterday.
Me too.
And I'm pretty sure that everybody in that movie is still alive. Right?
Good point. Yeah, good point. That's a great way to describe it to people.
Yeah. Yeah. So, we hear ghost hunters talk about the people died here. It must be haunted. Hauntings have nothing to do with death. Coincidentally, there might be a death, but they have nothing to do with death.
And I would think that sometimes, in my experience, the spirits go to places they liked being. They didn't have to die there.
Right. Sometimes they died where they lived or where they partied, where they liked, where they loved. But for the most part, people go to places, or people, depends on the culture. They go to places that they had an association with when they were alive. Could have been their home. A lot of bars and restaurants are haunted. There's a good reason for that, because especially bars, because that's where they were when they were haunting the place when they were alive.
Yeah, they were happy there. They
were happy there, right?
And it feels like home to them. So why wouldn't they come back in death? Interesting.
Yeah, but in other cultures, like I worked on a number of TV shows for Japanese television with a Japanese medium back in the 90s, and she told me that in Japan, especially for folks in the Shinto religion and other similar religions, spirits stay with their family. And the only spirits that haunt places on their own are ones who have no family or are very depressed, like they don't know what to do next. So that's compared to the US. Americans tend to stick to places rather than their family because we all know how much we love our families.
Yeah, exactly. That's so fascinating. You talk about the Japanese medium. My son is going to college and his degree is going to be in Japanese religion. He's
cool.
Studying. Yeah, it's been
That's
so
cool.
fascinating.
Yeah.
So there's been some overlap in some things we're talking about because he's really studying death and culture Japanese death and culture right now.
He should look at near death. He should look at near death experiences with various Japanese religions too, because they don't necessarily have that tunnel and the light. When I went to Japan to do this show on near death experiences, we talked to several people who had they went across a bridge in a sunny day to a garden, and that's where they met the ancestor spirit who told them eventually to go home. So there was no tunnel and light like we hear about. So very different culturally.
You know, Loyd, I know I've had you on for already an hour now. I don't want to take advantage, but oh gosh, and now my brain just left me. You made me. Oh, okay. So the tunnel and everything culturally, obviously, there's. Okay, how am I asking this question? So if the Japanese have a bridge they see during a near-death experience, but we have a tunnel, I've always wondered about that too. How do we prove that they were actually dead and brought back?
Well, there's we keep on pushing we keep on pushing the definition of death in terms of circumstances where people's heart stops and brain activity. That keeps getting changed, because we're knowing more and more. So somebody's heart stopped, that doesn't mean they're dead. One of my colleagues would say, you're dead, but not quite completely dead. And then if you have lowered brain activity on top of that, you may be dead, but you're not completely dead if you have no brain activity. It's if you can't come back, then you're triple dead. Then you're really dead.
Okay.
That's something like what Dean Radin would say. But there have been cases where people have had no discernible brain activity, either in surgery. There's a famous case with a woman named Pam Reynolds, because of the way they actually had to do the surgery, delicate brain surgery. They lowered her body temp, put her into hypothermia, essentially. No discernible brain activity. The skeptics will say, well, you can describe what the operation was because the doctors are talking and the nurses are talking. But if there's sound, it hits your eardrum, whether you're dead or not. And if you have any brain activity, that's going to register as you measure brain activity. Even if it doesn't show normal brain activity. Nothing was showing. And yet she was able to describe the operation from above, not only what was said, but also what it looked like and all of that. And there's some cases kind of like that, not quite as extreme as that one, but some really good cases like that, where there's next to no or no brain activity. And so that piece of it, that out-of-body experience, is part of it. What's at the other end of the tunnel, what the tunnel itself, the bridge, that's probably how our consciousness interprets what's going on. And even the person we meet at the other end, if we meet a person or have a voice or the light, that is also seems to be interpretational, because people will often say, who have a true near-death experience, that while they were there, wherever there is, they had the feeling that they knew so much more. And, they understood so much more. But as soon as they came back to their bodies, the sense that they knew more is there, but what they knew is gone. And one way to look at that, I've talked to some of our mediums about this as well. A lot of times mediums will describe the afterlife based on what the spirits tell them in a certain way, and it's pretty consistent across the world. But think about it. If existence as a spirit is completely different than our material world, and there are literally no words to describe it in any language because it's so different, you could only describe it, a spirit can only describe it to a medium in ways that the medium could understand. The images could only be things the medium could understand. Because as soon as you show this truly alien landscape, there'd be no words for it. How do you describe that? It's indescribable. Science fiction writers get pretty good sometimes, but even so, the aliens, the landscape, there's still things that we can put words to.
That is super fascinating, because I never thought of it like that there just aren't words. I kind of just thought it was silly that every teacher I've ever had describes heaven or the Summerland, and I'm like, how do you know? None of us know. But I guess that makes perfect sense. Those are just the only words somebody can use.
How do you describe the indescribable?
Yeah. Wow.
So the information has, the experience has to be in a context or imagery or something that we can actually, really visualize, do things like that. These days, it's getting easier and easier to take a science fiction novel that could never be filmed and create that on film. But 20 years ago, not so much. I mean, Avatar couldn't have been done 30 years ago.
No.
So much what I saw in Quantum Mania couldn't have been done very well.
Right. That was crazy. There was a lot of stuff in that movie.
Yeah.
A lot going on.
So they have to visualize that. And still, now we have the tools to do a lot of that visualization. But still, it's within our imagination. And if we can't imagine it, we can't even draw it, let alone talk about it.
That's a great point. Look, you've left me stunned again. I'm going to go to bed thinking all these things. And tonight I'm on the assignment where I've got to remember my dreams. I wonder what I'm going to dream about tonight.
Yeah, you have to let me know how this works out for you.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Well, Loyd, oh my gosh. Like I said in one of my emails, I feel like I could just listen to you talk for days and days and days. I'm totally becoming a Loyd groupie. But could you tell the listeners in your own words, because I'll read your bio, but a little bit about who you are, what you do. I know I'm backwards on this, but also how they can find you, all the cool classes you teach, all that cool stuff.
Okay. Well, first of all, it's Loyd with one L. That's important to know. If you Google me at all, pretty much I'm the only Loyd Auerbach in the world that I've been able to find. There was another one. He had 2 L's and he died a number of years ago. So,
okay.
And he wasn't even related. Although I have met somebody who knew him. So that's weird.
Weird.
Yeah, it was very weird. And the guy I met who knew him is a remote viewer. So that's even weirder.
No way.
Yeah.
That's
guy was a
crazy.
farmer, but very strange. Anyway, I have a master's in parapsychology from John F. Kennedy University, which is now National University. We had a program for about 11 years back in the 70s, 80s. I am technically part-time faculty at National right now. I was an adjunct professor at JFK for many, many years, teaching parapsychology mainly through the 1990s, and then I've been teaching other things there occasionally. I'm on the faculty at Atlantic University teaching a parapsychology course online. I am an instructor, one of the main instructors for courses in parapsychology for the Rhine Education Center. That's the education wing of the Rhine Research Center, the longest running parapsychology lab in the country, probably in the world as a lab. That was the old Duke Parapsychology Lab, actually. And I'm president of the Forever Family Foundation, which is a nonprofit working with spirit mediums in the family grieving process and also supporting the work of researchers doing research on life after death, on survival of bodily death. I am director of a group called the Office of Paranormal Investigations, which is a loose affiliation. It's a network of investigators who have been trained and educated, or who have demonstrated their education, their self-education in the field as well. And I am, besides being involved in parapsychology, I have a parallel career as a psychic entertainer and former magician. I perform as Professor Paranormal, which is what I've become known as within the paranormal world as well. And
do you currently perform? Because I want to watch.
I haven't performed in a while. I'm probably going to upload a performance that somebody videotaped for my students to watch. So I'll see about doing that.
Oh, okay.
But
cool.
when COVID hit, I decided not to do Zoom shows like some of my buddies. Some of my buddies were full-time mentalists or psychic entertainers. They had to support themselves. I didn't have to do it that way, so I didn't work on that. I'm looking forward to actually getting out there and performing again starting this fall. I'm going to be doing some marketing over the summer.
Come to Tucson.
I'd love to. Actually, I was in Tucson. I'm trying to remember when this was. Probably 1987.
It's time. You come back.
Yeah.
Come to Tucson.
I came back and
We'll get
lectured
some
and I performed
people
there too.
together.
Yeah.
Yay.
Yeah. Very different probably what I was doing back then. And then I'm also, in the psychic entertainment world, I'm a former president and past president of the Psychic Entertainers Association, which is an international organization of psychic entertainers and mentalists and hypnotists and other people. Currently, their annual meeting liaison. I help run the annual meetings every year. I do a lot of TV and media because my family, I actually got into television because my dad was a producer. My uncle was a director. I've been around the media, so I've done so many media interviews over the years since I got into the field. Been investigating since 1979. So I've been doing investigations for a long time and teaching almost as long as well. And finally, I have a certificate as a professional chocolatier.
Yes. I heard you talking about chocolate on another podcast, and some of it sounded so good. Something about goat milk and these extra things. And I was like, oh, that's crazy. Do you still do that though? I thought on that podcast you said you don't really do it so much.
I don't make chocolate so much anymore. I mean, occasionally I have people who request, and I'll mostly make truffles. I've actually done some truffle making workshops virtually as well.
Fun.
And I don't make the solid chocolates that much. I may get back into doing that. I was selling chocolates for a while, but then I got too busy with other things. But I do still do guided chocolate tastings. I've done a bunch of virtual ones, and I actually just 3 weeks ago did my first live chocolate tasting in a very long time for a group. So,
oh gosh, well, we've got to get you to Tucson for some entertainment and some chocolate.
Sure.
Definitely. Oh, well, Loyd, it's been so fun. I'm really, I keep telling everybody in other episodes, I'm really enjoying the classes I'm taking with you. I recommend them to everybody. Really expanding my mind, showing me a different way to look at things. And it's just been super exciting. I love learning from you, and I really appreciate the time that you took to be here today.
Absolutely. And, I should mention that people can find me, actually just follow me on Twitter, at Loyd Auerbach or at Prof Paranormal. And then I do an every other week Q&A on Facebook Live. And that is hosted by a page called The Live Paranormal, but you can get to it from my author page, which is loyd.auerbach.author on facebook.com.
Perfect.
And of course, my books are
in an email.
Yeah. And
I'll put it in the notes. Oh, yeah, your books.
My books are on, the ones that are in print are on Amazon right now, including the 2 novels that I co-authored, which are paranormal mysteries.
Exciting. Yes, I'll be sure to put all that in the notes. Just send me an email with all your little details, and I'll include that for everybody so they can find you. But thank you again so much, and I'll see you tomorrow in class. And I'm behind on my homework because I'm doing a podcast.
Right. Well, it's related to tomorrow night's topic for the one class. So
do I get credit?
You get some credit, yeah.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much, Loyd. I appreciate it.
Okay, Rianne.
Whether we believe that spirit is responsible for all the interesting and strange things that happen in our lives, or we go more for the scientific approach as a parapsychologist, we at the very least have a lot to think about. I want to extend my biggest thanks to Professor Loyd Auerbach for coming on the show today. Professor Auerbach stays extremely busy teaching, lecturing, and writing books and articles, and I feel privileged that he took some time out of his busy schedule to hang out here with us. I will put all of Professor Auerbach's contact information in the show notes, and I'll be sure to include his Facebook page where you can be a part of his bi-weekly Q&A, along with links to his books on Amazon. And I will include links to his YouTube channel, along with links to the Ryan Center and Atlantic University, where you can explore the various courses he is teaching. Thank you again for being here for another episode of All Is Not Lost. I know you have many choices on how you spend your time, and I appreciate that you have chosen to spend your time with me here today. If you're enjoying this show, please be sure to follow and share it with a friend. New episodes are released each Thursday at 3 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you again, and I look forward to seeing you next week.